This lesson is part of Media, Mobiles, and Ministry, which is a curriculum set of over 40 lesson plans covering 4 different topic areas: foundations of media ministry, mobile ministry, social media ministry, and do-it-yourself mobile media creation. You can find more information at www.mobmin.org/train. Welcome to Media, Mobiles, and Ministry. And this is the first lesson in the Foundations set of lessons. And we're going to start talking about media in a strategic way in this set of lessons. But today, I just want to start off with why media ministry and kind of an overview of things. And I want to just to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. When we talk about media in ministry, it can be exciting or it can be intimidating. We may say we are church planters, we disciple people, or we have some other kind of ministry role. Media is not our thing, or we have reasons why we don't want to do it, or we haven't done it in the past. But we are seeing media technologies changing the world, right? Ministries all over the world are seeing how including media in part of their overall ministry plan can really benefit them. There are breakthroughs that they're seeing in areas they've never seen before. So that's why we want to talk about it. And I'm going to try to convince you of that today. I'll start with a quick poll. When we talk about media, what is your first response or media ministry? You may say, A, I'm excited because I'm already really into media ministry. Or I'm skeptical because I know that media ministry is really expensive and complex and we can't do that with our team or our organization. Or I'm not really interested in media ministry because it's not, my ministry doesn't involve media. It's not what we do. Or you may have some other sort of response when we start talking about media ministry. Think about what other things you do have. Maybe jot down some of those ideas as we're thinking today. How do you feel when we think about media ministry? All right. So I want to start off though with a very important point, just to say media can't do everything. As we approach ministry, I'm guilty of this as well. I tend to see things from my own perspective. I get really excited about things that match my skills and my gifts. If we are media people, we might think that media is the greatest thing ever. If we're not media people, we may say, I don't know what to do with that. I would say, though, that media can't do everything. But it's important to learn about the potential of media, and this is going to be my proposal to you today. And I want to show a video created by the Visual Story Network it's called Why Visual Story, and I want to use this to kind of set the stage for where we are in the world today. So let's watch this together.
Let's say you visit another country. You have an important message to bring. In order to bring that message, you must speak the local language. Meet Yusuf. He lives in Cairo. Like half the world's population, he lives off less than $5 a day. Though he doesn't own a computer, he always carries his cell phone, surfs the internet with his friends, watches films every weekend, and lives in a home where the TV is on all day long. Whether he knows it or not, Yusuf is developing a worldview, a framework that gives meaning to his life. He's learning a language. How is his worldview shaped? Image after image, story after story, hour after hour, his heart is filled with messages from a broken world. He's becoming fluent. If Yusuf is being influenced by the 5 hours of content he consumes every day, what about Andrea? Every day, Andrea will spend 7.5 hours wired to her cell phone, TV, laptop, and iPod, taking in 11 hours of media. So what does this mean for Andrea? Well, she's becoming an expert in today's language of media. Each day, she will be exposed to 500 marketing messages and dozens of sexual references and acts of violence. She'll be led to believe that she lives in a world without hope, that she'll never be pretty enough, and that she can never be truly loved. How can Yusuf and Andrea discover the true story of their existence? In the midst of the deceptive messages, how will they understand the truth of the God who loves them? Who will translate? We will, but to do so we must communicate in their language, the language of visual story. Jesus revealed the kingdom through stories related to the everyday lives of people. You and I can do the same, using visual media. Whether it's through cinema or television, computers or cell phones, we must create and use compelling visual media that speak honestly and biblically about the issues of the heart, so the next generation can discover life change through Jesus. For 1,500 years, God's people communicated through preaching. In the last 500 years, printing accelerated the spread of the good news. Today, we must also portray the truth of Christ and his kingdom. There is another culture being formed, another world focused on corrupting ideals complete with its own language. Much like crossing a border to reach another people group, we must reach out through the televisions, computer screens and mobile phones of tomorrow's leaders. Together, we must learn to speak to Yusuf and Andrea and countless others around the world with the powerful language of visual story.
So, let's talk about how we see the media world changing, the world at large changing. And I want to ask the question, how do you see media changing in your community or the area that you want to reach? This is something, again, you can share in your groups as we go through a discussion time. Possibly even in the last few years, or maybe the last 10 years, you probably can identify ways that media has changed and shifted. Maybe it recently came to your area. Television, the internet, mobile phones and things are fairly recent in your area. Or if you've been in a place that's been saturated with technology and media for a long time, it has shifted in some ways. And you see this intuitively. You might even observe it in your friends or in your own life. The rate of media change is accelerating, I think. Oral storying has been around for millennia, right? People still do it, but it has evolved over time in cultures. And pure oral storytelling has largely disappeared from a lot of cultures. Printing press was really big. Print media was really big for centuries. Television was big for decades. The internet, virtual reality, and these other kinds of technologies, it seems like the turnover and change is everything lasts a shorter amount of time now, and it changes and it grows. That's something that we have to deal with. We have to decide how we feel about that. Media technology is helpful for us, and I want to affirm media technology, even if there are downsides to aspects of it that we experience or we observe. But media technologies do help us to share ideas in very, very powerful ways across great distances, right? We understand how things get passed around the world now and across our communities more rapidly, more broadly than ever before. It also, media technologies help us to learn more. We can do research instead of needing to find a book about something. That book probably exists in a digital form somewhere on the internet, right? So we can learn things, and we can learn from things that are not books, right? We can learn from videos and other means now. It may be our primary way of learning things. And we can connect. Obviously, social media helps us connect with friends, with strangers, with communities all over. And that's just something it's easy for us to do. It's happening, and how we respond to it is up to us, right? So here's some other cautions that I have. Media is not the end all, and media can't do certain things. Okay, I'm going to say that it doesn't save people. As a filmmaker, I felt pressure sometimes to get people saved with my movie, right? Oh, if God really uses this, people will just fall down on their knees and accept Jesus when they watch this movie. Does happen. But media, I don't believe media saves people. I believe that the Holy Spirit works through all these different kinds of its relationships and its media and its community and it's all these different things. And it doesn't replace traditional relational face-to-face ministry. Okay, so media can't do everything. Let's not throw everything into media and say this is the magic thing that's going to do everything for us. Okay, hopefully you understand that's where I'm coming from. So what is media good for? And there are two things I want to focus on. One of them is adding benefit to existing traditional ministry work. So if you're doing traditional ministry work, all sorts of things, media can help benefit that in certain ways. And then if you're in a place where it's very, very difficult to have conversations, it can actually jumpstart it. It can actually be a bridge, a catalyst to starting up some of those conversations. So we'll talk about both of those things. So first, let me just talk about benefit for work that isn't already media focused. So for instance, we can do something we call pulse finding. We can take the pulse of the culture by learning what is happening in people's lives. We can listen. We can hear what they're saying, especially in things like social media and, on videos that are being posted and memes that are being posted. What issues are they facing? What questions are they asking? Where do they go to seek and find answers for things? So it's kind of taking the pulse of the community or the culture we're in. Broad seed sowing is one that I think we're all familiar with. This is the, broadcasters, larger media kinds of projects. Sometimes they just, it gets the gospel out. We don't necessarily know where it goes, but it's broad seed sowing, and that's an important thing to do. We can also, though, drill down to the really small relational level and say media can help with disciple development. For instance, are there the media resources that we can distribute to people to help them with Bible studies or spiritual formation content or prayer tools or something like that? We are called to make disciples. Media can actually help facilitate that when we're not together. And the last thing is this idea, if we're dispersed, most of the time, how can we use online? We can deepen real world connections, people we really know. We're in community with them. We gather sometimes. We can develop those connections deeper with online interaction. There may be places where people can't gather often, or it's either geographically or because of restrictions of some kind. They aren't able to gather very often, but they do know each other. Going into an online sort of setting actually does work, and we can strengthen those connections. So that's something. It's not creating TV networks and film studios and things like that, but we can use very simple tools to do these things for a ministry that's not already media focused. The second thing is this idea of jump-starting work in difficult places. We can think of media as another tool to help us get to our true objectives. Media is not the objective. Our true objectives are things like we want to identify persons of peace, right? We want to find people in whom God is working and stirring up questions in their minds. And in every culture, all the time, there are people, God is touching people's hearts. God is speaking to people. And they might, in the midst of a whole group of people who are not interested in Jesus at all, they might be looking for something. If we're physically there in that community, it may be hard for us to find that person, okay? God can bring us together in some ways, but media is really good at identifying them. People are out looking for answers. They can click on things, they can search out answers, and they can connect with us in ways that we might not be able to connect physically, okay, in our day-to-day circle of relationships. So we might be able to identify a person who's actually seeking answers. The other thing is, for instance, our objective might be we want to gather people together to introduce the Bible to them and to begin to study it together. Well, how can we find out who's interested in this? Again, media can help us throw out the opportunity for people. People will find us, or we can find them, and we can also help them gather together. So it's using it to get to these bigger objectives, and media often now is being used to sort of jump over some of the hurdles that we've had in the past where we couldn't find those people, we couldn't gather those people. So new media has a great benefit in identifying and engaging seekers in hard-to-reach places. And there's an article that's posted here, and it's in the Leader's Guide. You can send people the link. You can print out the article, and I'll just mention it briefly here. It's called From North Carolina to Bhutan and Nepal, and this is on the mobileministryforum.org website. And it just tells a quick story here. I'm not going to read the story here in this lesson recording, but it talks about Pastor Naina, who is a Bhutanese Nepali pastor in the United States. So he's a refugee, but he's pastoring and ministering to people. The worker who wrote this story introduced him to the Jesus Film app. He said, "Wow, look, Jesus Film in my language. I can pass this around." He knew people who, in neighboring languages, he had people on his mobile list, he had people on his Facebook page. He emailed and texted 142 different people in the app using different languages. Then he put it on his Facebook page for 550 friends to see. In the afternoon, someone else, Ruben, who is a relative, lived in a different place in the United States, is also a refugee. He downloaded it, played it for some of his other friends who were playing soccer together. After watching it, people accepted Jesus, and then it started getting passed around the world. And Kumar, a pastor who was still in Nepal, opened it, downloaded it, and began showing it to families in his area. And over the next 6 months, Kumar, using just his mobile phone, planted 5 churches in nearby villages. And you can read in the article other things that happened. But what's really interesting is how this This is not a TV studio. This is not a TV ministry. This is a guy with a phone and the Jesus Film app. Praise God for Jesus Film. Many, many languages, many different films, not just Jesus, in all these languages. And so a ministry, a person who's not a media person, can have amazing impact and connect with people by using a simple little tool like that. And people who might not have been connected with believers in any way can get connected in that way. And so it's identifying and engaging seekers in hard to reach places. In this case, it went from the United States to another place in the United States to across the globe and probably spread beyond that, knowing how these things work. So let's kind of take that as an encouragement to us about the power of these tools, even very simple ones, right? So here's another statement. If you aren't using media, you may be lagging behind the people you serve. And a quote from a worker named Troy Carl. Gone are the days when mission workers could assume that our technology is more developed than the population we serve. Okay. Now, as a Westerner, this is really easy for me to fall into, right? I can walk around and say, oh, look, I live in the West. I live in America. Obviously, we have great technology and these things. But I travel to other places in the world, and I'm amazed at how people use technology. They have jumped over what we do in the United States, for instance, and in China and in Africa and places are doing amazing things with technology that we never thought of, right? If we have to be careful. We have to ask ourselves, how much do we understand these things? How sophisticated are we? Do we understand what is possible with these things? It's an opportunity for us to learn and to come alongside our friends and our communities to learn about things and not assume that we know how this all should be used or the best ways to use it, right? If you're willing to think about more about media ministry and how this could be used in your ministry, the series of lessons that follows this one is going to introduce you to a number of concepts about using ministry and how it can help shape your ministry and augment your ministry that you're doing. And I'll just run through a few of these things now as we kind of wrap up. Number one, you have the ability to influence attitudes, right? Visual stories are how we take in ideas, we change our ideas. You can influence attitudes about the gospel and Jesus by presenting things. We can also do what we call agenda setting. And agenda setting is basically encouraging people to think about things and talk with us about spiritual issues. So it's posing questions and setting the stage for having conversations rather than just preaching at people, inviting people to talk about things. Let's set the agenda for this conversation in a gentle, winsome way. Visual stories in media help us to reimagine our identity. If your people you work with have no sense that they could ever become followers of Jesus because that's not who we are, how can stories in media help reimagine identity? And that's a very powerful tool for that. And the other thing that we've talked about already is identifying seekers and engaging them in a process of discipleship, leading them toward Christ. So I want to wrap up here with learning activities. And I want to recap some of the questions we've talked about. So I want to send you off into groups. If you're watching this alone, write these things down, share it with a teammate or a friend. If you're watching this in a group, gather together to talk about these questions. And the first thing is, when you think about being in ministry, what comes to your mind? Do you have an attitude or feelings about it? I'm excited. I'm intimidated. I've had good experiences. I've had bad experiences. I haven't thought about it very much. Talk about that. So what comes to your mind when you think about media ministry? And discuss that. Another question would be, what part does media play in your current ministry activities? And it may be that you haven't been using media at all. Or we occasionally use a media resource for some media ministry activity. Or we're very involved in using media. If you're using it occasionally, describe what you've done and what effect it might have had. Did it work? Did it not work? Was it exciting? Was it disappointing? Same thing if you're involved in using media now. Share with others about your own experiences. You can learn from each other, especially if you're in a group right now that has varied teams and people from different organizations. You can learn from each other. So that's the second question. And the last thing is to think about this quote. Gone are the days when mission workers could assume that our technology is more developed than that of the population we serve. Have you experienced this? Is this an opportunity? Is it a threat? Is it a hurdle for us to catch up with these things? Or do we feel, we're pretty comfortable with that? We're pretty tech savvy and we're pretty on board with this. It could vary. in a range of these things. And so discuss these things with your groups right now. And then what I want you to do at the end is to get back together and share these ideas. Everybody get together and share ideas about possible uses of media, your experiences with media, your feelings about media, and maybe some ideas about what you might already be thinking about ways that you might be able to make use of it. Could you use it to learn things with pulse finding? Could you broadly sow seeds of the gospel? Could you deepen connections with people? Could you use it for disciple making? Think about those things and discuss those things together. And before you go on to the next lesson, I encourage you to really engage with this and think about this and think about ways, be open to ways that God may be calling you into a deeper use of media ministry. Thanks.